Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about watersheds. A watershed is an area of land that drains to a particular ocean, river, or lake. That's what a watershed is. A watershed works kind of like a faucet and a sink. The faucet is the rainwater, and the sink is like a basin that captures all of that water and it goes down the drain. Sometimes a watershed is called a basin. And what a sink has is this lip around the edge where none of the water is supposed to escape. And in nature, it works much the same way. A watershed is often surrounded by areas of high elevation. The mountains are a bit of an exaggeration, but it pretty much goes to show that here's a river between two mountain ranges, and the watershed would account for all of the rainwater that falls between these two mountain ranges. So any drop of water that falls in that mountain range, even if it doesn't hit the river, will hit land that points downhill towards the river. And so the river's watershed is between these two mountain ranges. Anything that rains over here is in a different watershed. Anything that rains over there is in another watershed. That's basically how watersheds work. Now for your assignment, I asked you to copy the map of Virginia's watersheds. And you don't need to copy every line. I just want the dark black outlines of the different watersheds. You don't have to copy the names of the rivers. It should look approximately like this. And what I did was I held my white piece of paper directly up to the screen, traced it in pencil, and then went over that pencil in dark black ink. So these are the major watersheds of Virginia. And you don't have to memorize all of their names. It's probably good to know that we live in the James River watershed. That is the southernmost tributary of the Chesapeake Bay. The top one is the Potomac River watershed. On the diagram it says Shenandoah/Potomac, but you just need to know Potomac. This one here is the Rappahannock River watershed. And then between the Rappahannock and the James is the York River watershed. Now these aren't the only rivers in Virginia. There's lots of rivers in Virginia. The James has many different watersheds within it. For example, there's an Appomattox River that's a tributary of the James. That watershed is smaller and exists inside of this larger James River watershed. The same goes for the Rivanna, as a smaller river near Charlottesville, and it exists as a smaller watershed within the James River watershed. And similarly, the James River watershed is part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which reaches all the way up through Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey. It actually crosses the boundaries of 6 different states. But back to the assignment. What I wanted you to do was get your Virginia map straight so where you have these watersheds outlined, including a little star approximately where Richmond is. And then we're going to shade in lightly with colored pencil Don't use marker because marker's gonna keep you from being able to put other stuff on top of it. So choose a color for the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and you're gonna shade all of the watersheds that lead to the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia the same color. So the Potomac, the Rappahannock, the York, and the James, those all lead to the Chesapeake Bay, so they're all going to be red on my diagram. You don't have to use red, you could pick a different color. But use colored pencil and please shade lightly because I'm going to have you draw and write things on top of this. So if it's in marker, you're going to have a hard time doing that. So shading in everything James River watershed and above as red here to represent the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Like I said, the Chesapeake Bay watershed goes way, way further north, but this is just the part of Virginia where the water is part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And choose a different color. And the southern part of the state is divided into two watersheds. The two on the right, the Roanoke and the Chowan, those go to the North Carolina Sounds. And I'm going to color those in blue. Lightly once again. And then the three river watersheds that are in the tip of the boot on the southwestern part of the state, those all go to the Mississippi River and eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to make those green, but you can choose your own colors for this. But there should only be three. Don't color all of them in a different color. You need three watersheds, three colors to represent the major watersheds of Virginia, because every drop of rainwater that falls in Virginia goes to one of three places. It either goes to the Chesapeake Bay, the North Carolina Sounds, or the Gulf of Mexico by way of the Mississippi River. And to indicate that, you're going to need a key. So I'm making my key now. Chesapeake Bay, North Carolina Sounds, and Gulf of Mexico / Mississippi River, with the appropriate colors shaded into these little boxes. So red means Chesapeake Bay for my diagram, green means Gulf of Mexico, and blue means North Carolina Sounds. And this is essentially what I want you to do today, is just draw the watersheds as Virginia and shade them in appropriately to represent the three major watersheds. Every drop of rainwater that falls in Virginia goes to one of these three places. One mnemonic device that I was taught to remember the names of the ones in the Chesapeake watershed is PRYJ, rivers flow to the bay. You're not going to necessarily need to know all of those, but definitely remember that Richmond is in the James River watershed. And we're going to add some more stuff to this diagram later, but for now, this is it.